Okay, I know that some people will still be joining us, but let's get going. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening for our 7th Sharsheret book club session. And I want to give a special shout out to all the members of the Oncology Nursing Society, ONS, who have joined us here tonight. My name is Melissa Rosen, and I am Sharsheret's Director of Training and Education, and I have the honor of interviewing tonight's guest. But before we begin, we have just a few housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on Sharsheret's website alongside a transcript. Participants' faces and names will not be in the recording. You may have noticed you were muted upon entry. Please keep yourself on mute throughout the entire call. We received many really insightful questions before tonight as part of registration, and we expect additional questions now. Please use the chat box, which you can access, of course, at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our very best to answer all of them. As a reminder, Sharsheret has been providing telehealth services to the breast and ovarian cancer communities for more than 20 years because cancer is so much more than just a physical experience. And I know that tonight's conversation will really elucidate that. As we move into the webinar itself, I want to remind you that Sharsheret is a national not-for-profit cancer support and education organization and does not provide any medical advice or perform, of course, any medical procedures. The information provided by Sharsheret and tonight's speaker is not a substitute for medical advice or a specific treatment for your medical condition. As always, please seek the advice of your healthcare provider. We are so incredibly excited to have with us tonight Theresa Brown, RN. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Shift, and of tonight's book, Healing, When a Nurse Becomes a Patient. She's been a contributor in the New York Times, CNN.com, the American Journal of Nursing, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. She's been a guest on MSNBC Live and NPR's Fresh Air, and she was featured on the Today Show this year. Her first book was Critical Care, and during what she calls a past life, she received a PhD in English from the University of Chicago. Theresa lectures nationally and internationally on issues related to nursing, healthcare, and end of life. Thank you, Theresa, for being here tonight. I read your book, and so much of it resonated with me as a survivor. We're going to talk about a lot of things this evening, but let's begin by having you read briefly from your book. Let's highlight. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, let me just say thank you for having me. I have been so impressed with this organization, the warmth, the caring. It's everything that everyone who has cancer needs and deserves. So it's just really a pleasure to be here and be briefly part of your community. So thank you so much. So this is the prologue to the book. And as a prologue, it does not need any prologue. I was reading Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay the day I went for my scan. The inside cover of the book is neon pink, not the girlish pink of Disney princesses and bubblegum, but a knowing, winking pink. The color of a bad, as in badass feminist. The kind of person who reads Bad Feminist while waiting for a mammogram. It was a follow-up. I had mentioned it to my husband, who was out of town, but no one else. I always got called back. Well, not always, but often enough, and I'd sweated the, quote, need for additional screening enough times that I had convinced myself there's no value to being anxious in advance. I had a mammogram and an ultrasound, right side only. I waited calmly in the hallway in between the two scans, and then I waited in the ultrasound room after the tech left and before the radiologist came in. I might have wondered why the tech left, but instead I read my neon pink book, word by word, without knowing what I was reading. A questionable scan merits an on-the-spot reading by an on-site radiologist who came in and redid the ultrasound. She took a long time, which annoyed me, and then, once I considered why she might be slow, scared me. Finally, she said, "I see a mass." A mass. I saw her in profile, gray hair pulled back from her face, her eyes focused on the screen. It might seem like she could have said more, but those 4 words were already too many. I didn't move, speak, or sit up, but I did begin to cry slowly. Tears dribbled out of each eye and slid down the sides of my face as I lay silent on the exam table. I'm a former oncology nurse and a hospice nurse. I knew the importance of letting the doctor finish the scan, that panicking wouldn't help me or her as she took final measurements or did whatever she had to do. I figured I was knowledgeable enough about having cancer because I knew about specific cancers, but I understood cancer patients' feelings because I'd cared for so many, that I'd confronted mortality because I'd had a number of patients die. But I was wrong. Other people's mortality is categorically different from one's own. Actual mortality, which is to say mine, had never before this moment seemed real. Could it be a fibroid adenoma? I blurted out. I'd had those before, and they're not cancerous. No, she said, gently shaking her head. This looks ugly. She left, and as soon as I heard the door latch, I sat up and sobbed, my whole body shaking. Fear had found me, and everything seemed upside down. My nurse self had abandoned me, and I had become a patient. Not just any kind of patient either, but a cancer patient. The ultrasound tech came back into the room so quietly I didn't hear her, but suddenly her arms were around me. She put her arms around me, a stranger, and said, "They can cure this." But that was what I did, comforted strangers. Not even a day had passed since I started my testing. It was still sunny and a little colder than normal for September, but I had changed. The nurse was lost on the bottom, the patient flailing on the top. I was terrified and sad and angry. I was afraid and forlorn and enraged. I was frightened and bereft and irate. And that was just the beginning. Thanks.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. It really sets the tone for tonight. It really does. Let's dive into the most basic of questions, because not only did I have this question, but several people asked that as part of their registration. You say in your book, people failed me when I was a patient, and I felt patience when I was working as a nurse. I see that now. How? Can you share some more about that?
Yeah, that was really the impetus for writing the book, because once I became a patient, I was so surprised at the lack of compassion and empathy in the healthcare I received. I mean, it just, with one notable exception, it just was not there. I mean, it's there in the scene I just read, right? But sort of in general, once I was on the treatment process, it wasn't there. I felt like a widget moving along an assembly line. And it made me look back on and think back on my own work as a nurse. And, I came to work trying to always give my best. I thought I was very empathic and cared deeply about patients. And I think all those things were true, but I didn't really understand what they were going through. And one story I tell in the book that really illustrates this for me is we had a patient come in for follow-up chemotherapy who was going to be staying in the hospital. He had started our outpatient clinic across the street. My patient was supposed to be on IV fluids. They hadn't started him. Okay, fine. I'll get him started on IV fluids. Call down to the supply room. Nope, we're out of IV pumps, which probably everyone on this call knows that just doesn't happen. And they kept being out of IV pumps. Very, very weird. I never found out what was going on. But so I had 3 other patients who were keeping me very busy, couldn't get an IV pump, and he would come and stand at the door of his room. And every time he caught my eye, give me this incredibly dirty look. And I thought, I didn't make this problem and I can't fix it. And I'm sorry, but we are going to start your chemo and it's going to be fine. Like some version of that, not at all in a patronizing way, in a kind of like, I have the big picture kind of way. Once I became a patient, I realized how much more was at stake for him in that moment. We had made a commitment to him. You will come early to our outpatient clinic. You will get out of here earlier because you have started earlier. Instead, he sat in a hospital room for 5 or 6 hours, literally, with his chemo not starting. All the trust he had in us, faith that we cared about him, that we had listened to him, that was gone. And I had no awareness of that. And I'm not saying I could have made things happen differently. I can't build an IV pump, right? Or pull one out of thin air. But to understand everything that was probably involved in that waiting for him. So that is what led to the book, this awareness of we treat people badly sometimes because we don't know how much they're hurting. We don't know how scary cancer is. We don't know what they're up against emotionally. And it would be better if we had more of a sense of that.
You just said that at that moment, all the faith, all the trust he had put in us was gone. Why is that faith and trust so important?
Because you feel like your life is at stake. I felt like yeah, it is. And I mean, for me, I had, I'm happy to disclose this, stage 1, very slow growing, very small tumor, still convinced I was going to die because I'd seen a lot of people die and because it's cancer and cancer is scary. And no one taking care of me ever said, you're not going to die. Like the ultrasound tech, but none of the physicians ever said, this is very treatable. We're not worried that this cancer in this instance is going to be the end of your life. No one said that to me. And so I think kind of intellectually, I knew that, but no one said that to me. And, it's a very scary disease, which everyone on this call knows. And I was taking care of patients, many of which were acute leukemics. That disease will kill you if you don't treat it right away. So I was coming from that background, but it's terrifying. It's terrifying to get a diagnosis of cancer. And there's so much, in the culture about people who say cancer is a gift or, think positive. And I've thought about this so much. No one says that about heart failure or having a heart attack or diabetes. Like all those things are just allowed to be diseases. But cancer is some sort of, emotional thing we're all supposed to accommodate to without it bugging us and terrifying us. And that's impossible. It's not a fair expectation.
I'm going to skip ahead to a question. I had several questions from now based on that. First of all, someone just asked, why would somebody call cancer a gift? And I think it's very much, I learned things about myself. It gave me a chance to reevaluate. But can we speak for a few minutes about toxic positivity?
Yes.
We're all told to think positive. And frankly, being told that made me really angry, right? And you say in your book, the opposite of optimism is hopelessness, not sadness or distress.
Hmm.
So let's talk about that culture of toxic positivity and what emotions should be allowed, encouraged, things like that.
Yeah, great question. And I need to give credit to Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote this book called Bright-Sighted: How Positive Thinking is Ruining America. She just died after a lifetime of great journalism. But I quote her in Healing. But yeah, the idea that if you think positive, that's going to help you. And I've had people, I mean, probably everyone on this call has had people said that to them. I've had people say that to me. And it just stunned me every single time because they really believed it. And I didn't want to say, what is the matter with you? That's not helping me. Or Melissa, like you say, you just get really, really angry. And this idea that there's some sort of direct line between your mood and how your cancer does, or even whether you get cancer. I mean, Susan Sontag really debunked that idea. There used to be this idea of a cancer personality, and it was someone who kept all their rage inside. Again, why is it this disease that we put these emotional burdens on? And it was so interesting working with these very, very sick bone marrow transplant patients. I mean, people would say things like, oh, that person's too mean to die, or that person lived because they thought so positively, they had such a good attitude, not realizing those two things are completely contradict each other. And it's so awful to think that you have this scary disease that your cells, without giving you a clue of warning, have just started dividing out of control. And then people are telling you, well, how you feel about this really is going to make all the difference. And there is nothing scientific that supports that idea. I just want to make that extremely clear. That is not in any way supported by research. And in fact, the opposite. Your mood does not affect whether your cancer grows or is destroyed by chemo or radiation. It has nothing to do with it. And Melissa, my version of your wanting to scream was in my oncologist's office. They had one of those signs up that says, cancer cannot take away your hope. Cancer cannot kill love. And I feel like, what? Like, cancer can kill you. I mean, I get, again, the idea, but this sort of being lectured about how you should hold on to, everything warm and fuzzy. And that's sort of your moral obligation to do that as a cancer patient. It's terrible. It's terrible that we do that.
Right. When we extrapolate, it means that anyone who doesn't survive wasn't positive enough, didn't do enough, right? And we know that's not the case, but that's a horrible message to send.
It is. And I mean, I've seen people who ended up dying very close to death, being accused by their family members of having a bad attitude. Well, like, I would have a bad attitude too if I were almost dead from cancer. It's completely confusing cause and effect. And it's completely not allowing patients to be human beings. Like, you asked me what feelings are allowed. And yeah, anger, sadness, fear. Also, if you happen to feel joyful, that's great. Or hopeful, wonderful, But cancer is scary, and we should be allowed to be afraid of it.
You talk in the book about DIY, do-it-yourself cancer care, and having to make decisions and arrangements for so many things that it was overwhelming, even for you, an expert in the field with years of experience. So if you were overwhelmed, how is the average patient supposed to handle it? What suggestions do you have for the rest of us?
That's a great question. And I have a very good friend, a neighbor who was diagnosed about 6 months before I was. And she is not in healthcare. And for her, when they told her things like, well, you're just going to have to wait a month for this to happen, or, well, it's just going to take 6 weeks for this to work out, she would just wait. And I would not, and so people often ask me that, and I think they think I have sort of the key, right? It's like, here's the secret password to unlocking good healthcare. If I had that, I would tell it to everyone. Like, I wish there were something like that. Unfortunately, there isn't, but you can push against the system. And unfortunately, that's really what people have to do. And I will make a confession that there's this phrase we used describing certain people as difficult patients. And I'm embarrassed to admit that I have said that myself. And there's a moment in healing where I revealed that I realized I was the difficult patient. Like, I was that person. And then I realized, oh, the people we call difficult patients are the people who just say, why do I have to wait on this? I don't understand what you're saying to me. Is this medication safe? There are people who ask questions. There are people who are not just going along to get along. And you'll see as I trace out, and Melissa, you know this in the book, that I started with that. I need to be compliant. I need to do what's expected of me. Felt so complimented when doctors told me how patient I was, like, wow, I'm so good at being a patient. And then I just got sick of that because I felt like this is not working for me. And started to ask questions and say, why? And I want this to happen sooner. And this doesn't make sense to me. And just embrace the role of being the difficult patient and without embarrassment. And that would be my advice to people. That doesn't mean be rude. It doesn't mean yell at people, not because it's wrong to yell at people, but because, think about if someone yells at you, you recoil, you tighten up, right? You're much less likely to be able to help them. But persistently saying, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? Can you find someone who can explain it to me? Why is this taking so long? Ask those questions and don't take no for an answer. The system does not like people who do that, but it can help get you what you need. And if you feel like you can't do that for yourself, and I had a moment where I felt like I cannot make these phone calls anymore. And I got my husband to take over for me. So if someone else can do that advocacy for you, it's unfortunately what you need. And it's interesting. I've had several people now since reading Healing, friends of mine who say, oh, Theresa, I was thinking about healing because like a woman whose husband injured himself and he needs narcotic pain medication, and just the hoops they've had to go through just to get this medication in the right dose are just incredible. And this is someone who also was in healthcare. And so now people are pointing out these instances to me where just something that should be so simple ends up being so complicated. And it can be exhausting to advocate for yourself, but I still feel like it's better than just feeling like I just have to go at their pace. I have to accept that I won't understand what's happening to me. I will just take medication without having a sense of what it might do to my body and whether the risks and benefits are worth it. It's hard to be an advocate, but I think it's the only thing that really will make a difference.
I agree. And I believe there are studies that show that while having the right attitude is not necessarily relevant, understanding your treatment is relevant and makes a difference in outcomes, because you will, if you understand it, you're more likely to participate actively in it. So let's stay with being a difficult patient for a second. At one point in the book, you say that difficult patients don't always get the best care because they frustrate their healthcare providers, but that those who are compliant also may not be getting the best care because they're not advocating for themselves. So that seems like a very thin line. Can you just talk about that thin line for a sec?
It is a thin line, and that's where I get into the don't yell, don't get angry at people, don't swear at people, knowing how to advocate in a way that gets the attention of people in healthcare. And that probably is where I had an advantage, because having worked in healthcare, I knew the things to say, I knew the way to say them. And it's a good question. My editor and I struggled with how to explain that in healing. And I'm still not sure I completely got it across, because I didn't have a good, obvious example. And it's hard to, say just sort of knowing the milieu and the culture and the environment, those words just come to me much more naturally. And that's why I try to give people these really simple phrases like, I don't understand. Can this be speeded up? Why is this taking so long? So that's what I really try and encourage, to find that sweet spot on that very thin knife edge of,
Yeah.
just be very basic, straightforward, and persistent.
Right.
And there are times when I got mad. You may get mad. I'm not saying that getting mad is a problem or wrong. And sometimes it may be that you feel like you have to get mad. It's the only way you're going to get people to help you. And that may happen, and there's no need for anyone to feel bad about that. Just in general, I think you're going to get people to help you more by persisting rather than by kind of browbeating them. It's purely about strategy. There's no moral value connected to any of this, except for the moral value of you getting the care that you need.
So a question just came in through the chat that I would normally push to the end, but it's very relevant here. So one thing you didn't talk about in that tightrope walk is asking for a second opinion, telling your healthcare provider you're going to get a second opinion, which is everybody's right. And a good healthcare provider might even suggest you do that. But we know from our work at Sharsheret that so often we're afraid we're going to offend our doctors, our nurses, our healthcare team. So as someone who worked in oncology, go ahead and tell us how wonderful that idea is.
Yes, and whoever brought that up, thank you. I think I don't talk about that enough, and it's important. I guess I sort of think of it as standard, but you're right. I mean, it also brings up questions of insecurity. Is this going to hurt my surgeon's feelings? Yeah, so I do really strongly recommend that, partly just because you'll get a sense of maybe what you like or what you don't like. And I went to 2 different surgeons, and I ended up picking the one with the sharper mind, the better reputation, but also the weirder personality. And when it was all done and my surgery had gone really, really well, I really kind of regretted that. Like, I really kind of wished I'd picked the more human surgeon, but I'm very aware that I made that decision after everything was done. Right. But I think it's so important, if you have the energy to do it and you want to do it, to always get a second opinion, to see what someone else has to say, to see how they approach you, to see how their office works, because that may give you a feeling that you want to have them taking care of you when you're really sick, or you don't. And I don't even think you need to tell physicians that necessarily. You can see one doctor. If they say, well, let's schedule this appointment, go ahead and schedule the next appointment and then see the other doctor. You can always cancel whatever appointment you've made. And I'm not encouraging people to be dishonest. I'm just saying that is your right. Keep going, making plans, making appointments, getting pre-approvals, whatever you have to do, and then see people when you can see them. And I recently switched medical oncologists because there was a whole mess. It's a very long story of me on tamoxifen and then starting Arimidex, and it's a really long story. But I was just so unhappy with how the medical oncologist I was seeing handled it, and switched to a different doctor who was recommended by a friend who's a surgeon. So that's another way I was lucky, is that I had friends who could recommend doctors to me. So yeah, always, if you want to get a second opinion, you do not have to be telling, this is not like a date to the prom. You don't have to tell each surgeon that you're talking to another surgeon. That's your right. It's your business, and make the decision that you need to make.
Thank you. Okay, there is a phrase you use in your book that really resonates with me. You say that pain and survival do not sit at opposite ends of the seesaw. Those facing cancer may be cured, but the cure often comes with difficult, painful, sometimes even permanent side effects. You say in the book, of course, you're grateful that the treatment saved your life, but sometimes also frustrated at what it took away. You say that one of the mistakes healthcare professionals make is that the good they do makes the bad unimportant. Can you talk more about that? Because I think we all feel that at different times.
Yeah, that's one of my more, I don't know if I want to use the word painful, but I just will, painful memories from nursing, working with leukemics, and I'm sure there are ovarian cancer patients in this same group. They get really, really powerful chemotherapy. For ovarian cancer patients, you can have really intense surgery, and breast cancer patients too. I think the chemotherapy is a little bit more bearable, if that's not an oxymoron. But every time people would talk about their side effects, like, yeah, but we would all think, but we saved your life. Like, your hair fell out, but we saved your life. Like, it's your hair versus your life, like we have the moral ruler here, and, we are on it. Like, you're looking at this the wrong way. And really serious things, like people who had such bad neuropathy in their feet that they really couldn't walk that well anymore. I mean, that's a huge hit to your quality of life. People who completely lost their sense of taste, their sense of smell was all disordered. I mean, on and on and on and on and on. Like, everyone knows what this is. And I think it was our way of comforting ourselves, right? But we saved your life, and making ourselves feel better about this ethical dilemma that's embedded in the treatment process. First, do no harm. I mean, we violated that all the time with chemotherapy in the interest of a greater good, sort of, if you want to put it in moral terms. But then once I became a patient, and it was really like the surgery and the radiation were not that bad for me, but tamoxifen was awful, terrible. And that's really where I got that incredibly strong sense of, wow, this has really compromised my quality of life, because it really, really did. And I just, I think there needs to be much more reckoning in the oncology community with the harm that's done by treatment. There needs to be more honesty about that, more empathy, all those things. And, I was not told the symptoms I might have from tamoxifen. I ended up educating myself about, my doctor talked to me about blood clots, but not the brain fog, the fatigue, not
the lifestyle issues, the medical concerns, but not the lifestyle issues.
Right. That I had moments where I talk about in healing that I just felt like I just was a lesser person than I had been in terms of concentration, in terms of mental acuity. And that's huge. And for me on tamoxifen, it was really not that much benefit, but still some benefit. This was not chemo I was getting to kill my leukemia. And yet the feeling among the doctors was, well, you just need to take this drug. Why don't women take tamoxifen? We don't understand why women don't take tamoxifen. 50% of women don't take tamoxifen for 5 years. It's just like, why could that be? And, it's like, why don't you ask and then listen to the answer? So sorry, I've gotten on an emotional tangent, but
No, thank you for sharing.
yeah, but it is a difficult thing to look back on as a nurse to, not have really gotten it when somebody said, yeah, I really can barely walk. And I'll tell people this summer, I'd always wanted to go to Africa. So we did a safari in Africa this summer. It was I had cancer and I get to go to Africa trip. And it was everything I wanted it to be.
It's reasonable.
Yeah, right. It was just so wonderful. The first camp we were in, there was a couple there from England, and there last night, lovely people. We just started talking, and I said, well, because we'd showed up and it said, oh, we don't really want to be mixing with other people. And I said, well, part of why I felt that way is I'm coming off a book tour. I've been spending all this time talking about myself and my cancer. And she was a breast cancer patient. And she had chemo, and she had bad neuropathy and said she really can't walk very well. And, we'd only gotten to know her for 3 days, but she was a lovely person, and they were such a nice couple. And she just said in that way that British people can, she said, you're just not the same afterwards, are you? And it was such a concise, powerful statement of what going through treatment is like. And Melissa, at the start, when you said, yeah, it's not just about the medical care that you get. And she really felt that too, all the way across the pond, a very similar experience.
I think it's pretty universal for cancer patients. But what I will say, and maybe you have information about this or maybe not, but I will say that we're hearing more and more studies that are about quality of life. Whereas before it was just studies about prevention or cure, which obviously are still there, but now we're also hearing about studies to impact quality of life when someone is either going through treatment or recovering from treatment.
Right. And I people should know, I also talk in healing about this book called Compassionomics. Speaking of studies.
That's my next question.
Oh, okay. Would you like to ask? Why don't you ask the question?
Yes. So in your book, you cite this amazing idea called Compassionomics as the scientific idea that caring actually makes a difference. You share that care providers have no idea how powerful, let's say that many care providers have no idea how powerful compassion can be, and you call it a game changer. In what way is it a game changer? And what should patients expect from their team with regard to that attitude?
Yeah, well, what should people expect? I mean, let's hope maybe a sea change will come, like with the kind of studies that you're talking about. The beauty of that book is they show that compassion not only makes patients feel better, but can save money. So very, very simple intervention that they found in a study, right? People getting ready for surgery, study group, control group. Study group had a nurse who was trained in compassionate intervention come and talk to the patients before surgery about the surgery, things they were worried about. Simple, right? Control group, nothing. Post-operatively, the patients who'd had the intervention needed less pain medication, experienced less pain, reported less pain, recovered better than the patients in the control group. So you have people needing less medication, spending less money on medication, maybe even a shorter length of stay. And staff are so much happier if they can actually take time to make people feel cared for. And we're looking at an epidemic of burnout, not just in healthcare, but lives are on the line when it's in healthcare. Nurses, doctors. I try to always mention this, the suicide rate for physicians is twice the national average. At least 50% of nurses now working are thinking of quitting the profession. I mean, if we could get the system to focus a little bit on pushing everyone through to make as much money as possible, and instead let people care, that's why most of us got into this work, that might really be a game changer for rescuing staff and helping these beleaguered, exhausted professionals recover from everything they went through with COVID and bring people back to the bedside. So that's one thing. And then patients do better also. So can people expect that? I wish I could say that you will. It might be something else you kind of have to advocate for, but I think it can happen. This friend I mentioned who was diagnosed before me, her first biopsy, I think she basically cried through it and felt terrible, and then went back to the same place, and they had a nurse come in to hold her hand for the second biopsy.
Simple as that.
That she needed. Yeah. And it was a completely different experience to her. Instead of just feeling like, here I am, I've been turned into a piece of meat, I'm in pain, I'm scared. These people care enough that someone is coming to say, hey, I see that you're human. I'm going to be human with you because you need that right now. Yeah, it's as simple as that. Yeah.
So I'm watching the chat as you're talking to note questions coming in, and so many people are feeling validated by what you said. And there are a couple of stories. Someone said that her doctor laughed because he disagreed with something she had said, and the response was, there are other oncologists out there. But so I think there's a difference between being disrespected and not being receiving a compassionate care. If you're being disrespected, that's a situation that is worthy of considering change. If you would rather a doctor and the team be more proactive, you could I suspect there's nothing wrong with saying, I know that my partner can't be in here while I'm getting the biopsy, but could somebody please be in here to help me stay calm? In that's also a way to advocate for yourself. We have a lot of, go ahead.
I want to add to if your doctor is disrespectful. I mean, we occasionally had patients inpatient who would say that the attending physician, the doctor who was assigned to round on them in the hospital, was not allowed to be their doctor anymore. And people respected that. I respected it in the sense of adhered to what they were saying. So even if you're I just want to make sure that people know this, even if you're in the hospital, the attending physician, if someone laughs at you, if they're rude to you, if they don't take you seriously, you can say, I'm not going to have that attending be my doctor anymore, and they will assign someone new. I mean, it's so important for people to know that. And I just have tremendous respect for the patients who felt like they needed to say that, and they did. And from what I saw, they did not get pushback. I don't know that anyone went to that doctor and said, hey, maybe you could stop being a jerk, but at least that particular patient did not have to put up with that physician. And the thing is, if more people did that, there might be more change happening. And I think we're all, very naturally afraid of doing that, right? And it's not like I'm putting the burden of change on patients, because that's not fair. But if you're thinking about should I speak up? Yeah, do it for yourself. And as a bonus, it might make things better for someone else. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Oh, thank
Never
you.
feel trapped.
Thank you for that. I have so many more questions I want to ask, but I want to get to participants' questions. So I'm going to ask one more as a transition. Several of the questions that have come in are asking you somewhat medical questions. So let's finish my questions with, did your own diagnosis and cancer factor into your decision to move away from clinical nursing?
Yeah, I really think it did. It was too hard for me to have actually seen what things were like for patients. I couldn't have those blinders anymore. So in healing, I talk about this, spending 2 hours on the phone to try and get a fentanyl patch to a home hospice patient's house to make sure it would arrive, with this ridiculous thing of I had to call the pharmacy benefits manager, but they wouldn't release the fentanyl patch because they're too expensive without my manager calling in, and I couldn't get a hold of my manager. And then the pharmacy, well, they weren't going to send it out without approval from the pharmacy benefits manager. And so I would just like do some work and then, because I finish my day, go home, typing in notes and stuff, and then call one of these entities, right? Trying to make things happen, and going to bed that night and just feeling sick to my stomach. Like, I can't believe this man is dying. And people can't just say, we're going to send out a fentanyl patch, which he'd been on. It wasn't a new medication, just insane. I'm probably being more candid in this moment than I have been because Melissa asked me a good question. But yeah, I think it was just too hard for me to tell myself, well, in the big picture, this is all going to work out. That just didn't feel like enough anymore. So I'm hoping to use the time I'm not working clinically to do more advocacy, and maybe I can paint on a bigger canvas in a way that's about what all of you are going through.
So that's the perfect segue to some participant questions. And one of the questions that I wish I had thought of was, as you've moved away from clinical and you've written and you've spoken on these issues, have you thought about, or have you already have you done some training of healthcare professionals since your experience, or retraining maybe?
Not, and this is the second time recently. I just did another book event a few weeks ago, and a nurse there asked me that. So maybe this is a sign that
take it as kismet. Yes.
Yes, it's something to really think about, especially because we're not in COVID panic mode anymore. I mean, I finished the book during the lockdown, and then the book came out right when last April. So we're all sort of thinking we got a little bit of normal here. But now that, we've embraced normal, you could argue about whether that's appropriate or not, but we have embraced normal. I need to give that some thought. I think it's a great idea.
In your education, your nursing education, did you have any education on this, on the effect of compassion on patients, care and outcome? Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of talk in nursing school about empathy, the difference between empathy and sympathy, and how we're the patient advocate. You get that message very, very strongly, but no, it's not presented as part of the sort of professional toolkit, for lack of, I hate to use that word, but I can't think of a better one right now. Toolkit for nurses, thinking compassionately. And I feel like, unfortunately, the way that idea often gets expressed as, well, treat every patient as you would your own mother or your father or your brother or your sister, which is not so great because it sort of makes it personal, which of course the care is, but it's not the same thing as sort of being a clinician and coming in and you have knowledge, and then you're bringing compassion in as part of your professional persona, and what you can really offer to patients. I think just saying, treat the person as you would your mother or your father. Well, how do we know? You could get 20 different nurses, you could have 20 different versions of compassion, right? Instead of really giving people training and what that means, or talking about it in a more concrete way. And I think that's something that nursing school could do better. I know it's something that medical school could do better. And I think medical schools, at least they're talking more about humanities now and sort of seeing patients as human beings. But most doctors are not required to be geniuses, even though I think they're sort of told that a lot in medical school. I mean, you have to be incredibly smart and very hardworking, right? But most of being a physician is not about being a genius. It's about knowing what to do, being able to talk to people about it. And yet all physicians are kind of trained as if they all need to be geniuses. Instead of that they need to be good at working with people. And, not everybody's going to be great at working with people, but you could, some work on how to do that better.
Everybody can get some extra training.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, a couple more questions. So somebody actually said that she is a nurse and a patient as well. And it seemed that being a patient seemed foreign and communicating was difficult, really another language, even though she thought she knew that language. The other thing she said, which surprised me, was it almost feels a bit shameful to be a patient after being a nurse. And that she felt completely disconnected from her professional side. So you mentioned a little bit about feeling disconnected, but could you talk about that a little more, or if shame came into the equation at all?
Yeah, I completely hear everything that nurse is saying. I think it did feel kind of shameful. It felt shameful that I needed to take a break from work. I mean, I felt it was the best part of me that felt like I cannot take care of dying people while I'm getting actively treated for cancer. But I still felt like, well, why not? Like, why aren't I invulnerable? Why aren't I superhuman? And so I think that's where that shame comes from, is like, oh my God, I'm vulnerable. And actually, that might also be part of why it would be hard for me to be a nurse now, because the job is so demanding that there has to be a kind of myopia about what it's asking of us. And I'm not sure I'm willing to make that level of sacrifice, even though I love the work and it's important and wonderful and all that stuff. So I do understand the shame, that feeling of disconnection. Yeah, I had such a weird reaction myself to my diagnosis, and that I forgot everything I'd ever learned about breast cancer, basically. And I very rarely took care of breast cancer patients unless they were in the hospital and very, very sick, or they were on hospice. But, basic things like staging, tumor marker, you don't forget that stuff. And yet I did not remember anything. And I'm very lucky that I have a good friend who's a breast surgeon, and I called him and went through the biopsy report that I got, because again, nobody went through that with me. I mean, that's a whole other issue, is people getting their diagnoses and their information over patient portals, which I've heard more and more stories about lately. But so, yeah, I forgot everything, which we know from trauma, you can, like, part of your memory can shut down, memories become fragmentary, which is part of why the book is in short chapters. But
Thank you for that.
but I identify with everything that nurse is saying. I really, really do.
One more question. So we spent a lot of time tonight talking about what could improve within the field of oncology. So let's just end with this. So many of us feel gratitude toward our healthcare team. One participant tonight cites her nurse navigator, who was warm and worked hard, efficiently, explained things in detail, no matter how many times she asked. So let's just take a moment to clarify that just because there's an opportunity to do things better does not negate the amazing role that healthcare professionals have in saving lives. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think thanks to whomever brought that up. And yeah, I will add that the bright spot for me was my radiation oncology team. They were wonderful in all ways. And my experience there showed me that it's not complicated. Like they didn't have a patient compassion initiative. There was no chief compassion officer at the hospital. Not that those would be bad
That's
things.
not a bad idea, though. Let's be honest.
Right. But it was, everyone was very kind. They had a Keurig machine. They were extremely patient. Like we have one of those systems where it's just a check in with your index finger. And one day I forgot and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. And she said, oh, no, it's fine. I'll just check you in here. That seems so normal, right? But in my hospital system, it's not. People will snap at you if you don't go and use that stupid thing with your index finger. And even things like in the waiting room, they had the TV on and Let's Make a Deal was always ending right before my radiation treatment time. And for some reason, I just couldn't stand watching Let's Make a Deal in that situation. So I said, could you turn the TV off? And they said, no, we can't, but you can sit out in the hallway. And so I sat out in the hallway. There were comfortable chairs. I watched people come and go into the OB departments of like all these pregnant women coming, going, which was fun. And they came out and got me, for 5 days a week for 4 weeks, always very kind about it. It's just basic civility and politeness. And clearly there was someone in the leadership in that department who had decided that, like, we're going to be a good place for patients. And so, yeah, I do want to give a shout out to the people who are making a difference. I know that they're there. I tried to be that person. And I think for some people, I was that person. And for some people, I really didn't get what was going on with them. Yeah, it's just that, I think we could have that for most people. And that would be just so lovely. That's what I want.
That is the goal, and a beautiful one. Okay, as we end tonight, first and foremost, thank you for sharing so much of yourself. You've shared a perspective most of us don't ever have access to, and the insights were both fascinating and empowering as we each manage our own cancer experience. I want to thank again tonight's sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo and Merck. Right now, or just a second ago, there was an evaluation link in the chat box. Please take just 2 moments to complete that evaluation because they really do inform future programming. And I'm happy to share that those who complete it will be entered into a raffle to win an autographed copy of Theresa's book, Healing. There you go. As we close, I want to remind you that Sharsheret's team is here for you and your loved ones during this time. Whether you have compassion with your healthcare team or not, we will share more compassion and other amazing resources designed to help you navigate your cancer experience. All are free, completely private, one-on-one. Contact information is being put in the chat box right now about that. And if you're here as a health provider, shout out again to ONS. We're here for you as well. We can provide you with free educational resources and support kits for your breast and ovarian cancer patients, free training for you and your team that talks about the impact of not only compassion, but culturally competent cancer care. Please reach out to me directly for more information, and my email is right there. Thank you again. Can we post the evaluation link one more time? Thank you again, Theresa, and thank you all for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you again at Sharsheret programs in the new year. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Yeah, good luck to all of you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.